We have so many stories in our lives, but our stories are not always heard. On the Hear My True Story podcast, we tell our own true stories.
Before the white car parked, our head teacher had scattered. Looking at him, I could only see his tie that was flying backwards, waving at us, and he disappeared in thin air.
I want to share my life story. I want to share my voice with the people because I know that just a small joke I can tell through this podcast, it will make someone smile.
When you ask me what I fear most in life, I would definitely respond to you and say it's fear itself.
We are fighting for togetherness. We are fighting for equal rights. We are fighting to end injustice.
You don't have to be a storyteller or writer because, guess what? Life writes the best stories.
Hear my true story.
This is your favorite time of the week with your number one podcast.
Hear my true story.
Yeah, my dear listeners, welcome to Hear My True Story podcast. It is me, your host, Otako, and I want to say thank you for supporting Hear My True Story in the year 2023. And now we are in the year 2024. Well, what a wonderful beginning. But before I start, I want to say, my dear listeners, Happy New Year. Thank you for supporting Hear My True Story podcast. As I can tell you, this is a platform where we tell our own stories. And we are so happy in the past year for everyone who shared their own story on Hear My True Story podcast. We want to thank you. And for those who have been listening from the beginning of the year 2023 to the end of the year 2023, thank you for being such a wonderful listener and for supporting this wonderful podcast. And I'm happy to say, as the host of the podcast, I'm excited, overwhelmed for the support that you have showed us in 2023. For those who have reached to us and advised us, for those who have shared their personal stories, we are so happy that you give us that opportunity to tell your story on our podcast. It's not easy to come out and share your personal story, but I respect it whenever anyone shares their story on this wonderful podcast. And for those who have not shared the stories, but they have supported by listening to the podcast from the year 2023 to the end of the year 2023, well, I want to say that is a wonderful support that you have showed us. Some of you have written to us, some of you have given us advice. What can we improve? What can we make better? And we're working on it to make it more better and better. Others have reached us too. Others have written to us saying, well, I can't share my personal story, but maybe you can share it. And we have done so. Thank you for always reaching out to Hear My True Story podcast. Well, before wasting a lot of time, I want to say 2024 will be a year where we shall be telling more new stories. We shall tell the narratives that have not been shared. And we look forward to sharing them with you. And also we look forward to have you again this year 2024. Of course, healthy and happy and telling our own stories. That's what we wish for everyone who listens to Hear My True Story podcast. And I want to say thank you to my dear friends and those people who are behind the podcast, who are not always talking on this microphone, but they are supporting the podcast through any form. I'm here to say thank you for supporting us on Hear My True Story podcast. Well, for the new partners that we have joined with since 2023, we welcome you again 2024, that we can work together and tell more stories and share more narratives on Hear My True Story podcast.
With you every week. Hear my true story.
I can also give back feedback to my dear listeners. The podcast did well in the year 2023. And I'm so happy to say thank you for the people who listen to this podcast from the city of Marburg in Germany. thank you for supporting us. And of course, there are also other bigger cities that have been listening a lot, from Hamburg, Frankfurt, Berlin, Texas, Kampala, Nairobi, Uganda, Denmark, United States, United Kingdom. Well, you guys, thank you for always supporting Hear My True Story podcast. And you know what is so exciting is that at the end of the year, I get back the statistics of how the podcast has performed. And guess what? We have wonderful episodes that did well in the year 2023. So as Hear My True Story podcast, we usually take January as a month of preparation to prepare for the year 2024. We take a January as a month for preparation. As we prepare for the new content that we shall share with you, my dear listeners, we shall be sharing some of the wonderful episodes that did well in the year 2023. That means that the people who have been listening to Hear My True Story podcast, this may be old episodes for you, but well, listening to a story, it is always new whenever you listen to it. It is always bringing new ideas, new reflections, new relations. And for that reason, I will be posting some of these old episodes that did well in the year 2023. So in the month of January, we shall be sharing these wonderful episodes with you. And then in the month of February, we shall kick off with new wonderful episodes, new guests, new co-host. Everything will be coming in new. Thank you guys for making Hear My True Story your number one podcast on your streaming podcasting platform. That is such a wonderful opportunity that you've given us.
Hear My True Story.
Yeah, my dear listener, thank you so much for listening to Hear My True Story podcast. And again, I want to say Happy New Year and wish you a healthy year and wish you a happy year 2024. And I hope that maybe next week we have you again on the same podcast, Hear My True Story. It has been me, your host, Otako. Thank you for always supporting. And I would like to say bye for now.
We not only have voices for a podcast, but also faces for YouTube. Don't miss your next episode. Hear My True Story.
Thank you for listening to our podcast, Music by Edwin Matovo, hosted and produced by Otako. Subscribe to our podcast for more stories and visit us on our website, hearmytruestory.com, for more stories. All the links are listed in the show notes of this podcast.